Learn more about Carly Fiorina by going to carlyfiorina.com. Great to have you with us, Carly, again on this very interesting day.
Yes, it is.
Let's get to the president's speech last night. Carly Fiorina, break it down for us.
Well, first, I do think sometimes we get hung up on the speech as opposed to the policy. It was a fine speech, but more than that, I agree with the policy. When I was on the campaign trail, I said all the time our mistake in Afghanistan was we got into the business of nation building instead of battling terrorism. And what the president said last night was we're going to refocus on battling terrorism. I agree with that. The second thing he said that I certainly agree with, that is good policy, is we need a regional strategy. It cannot simply be Afghanistan. It cannot simply be the United States alone. Looping in India and Pakistan makes all the sense in the world. And the third thing that he said, with which I agree, is that the rules of engagement have changed under his presidency and they need to continue to change. In other words, that when we put troops in harm's way, we have to allow them to do what they need to do to defend themselves and to win. And he described victory in very clear terms. We're going to defeat ISIS. We're going to defeat the Taliban. That's what we're there for. And so, yes, it was a fine speech, but I think more importantly than that, it's the right policy.
When you say, though, defeat the Taliban, he also said he might be open to bringing the Taliban to the negotiation table. So how do you defeat them and then negotiate with them?
That's an interesting question, and I think what he's reflecting is the view of many generals, and frankly, a couple presidents before him, both Bush and Obama, believed at a certain point that they were more likely to negotiate from a position of weakness. And so in order to bring them to the table, you have to defeat them. They have to see that it is in their self-interest to come to the table, and they will not do that as long as they are winning, the Taliban that is, and in a position of strength. You have to weaken them before they will get reasonable and talk.
So let's focus on that. So his policy last night, in the short term, and the most clearest thing to understand is he's going to shoot terrorists. Terrorists are going to die. Okay, so no timeline. I agree with that. And no benchmark either. So is this just a war in perpetuity? We just kill people in Afghanistan infinity?
Well, good question, and truthfully, no one really knows the answer to that. However, I think there are a couple things that we ought to bear in mind. Number one, we do have troops stationed in perpetuity in hotspots around the world. Let's just think of South Korea.
Right.
When there are terrorists in the Philippines, just as an example, U.S. troops help kill them. So it's not as though Afghanistan is the only place in the world where our troops are engaged in killing terrorists for a very long time. And wherever terrorists have safe harbor, we, the United States, will have to work with our partners to kill them. That's just a fact. Secondly, I think finally, perhaps, President Trump and the United States have more willing partners in Afghanistan. I don't know if you happen to see the reaction of Afghan government officials. Now, by the way, the Afghan government is split. There are lots of problems with that government, no doubt. But it is also true that they support this particular policy. That's reassuring. And it's also true that Trump has, at least so far, established what appears to be a good working relationship with the Prime Minister of India, Modi. We continue to work with the Pakistanis, so it's possible we will be there in perpetuity. That's obviously not a good thing. But it's also possible that with the right partners and the right policy and the right rules of engagement, that we can continue to make progress.
All right, so you agree with the policy. You think Trump
I do.
did the right thing as opposed to just getting the hell out?
I think getting the hell out would have been the height of irresponsibility. I think it would have made a bad situation far, far worse. That is clearly what the generals on the ground believe. It is clearly the advice that they gave the president, and to his credit, he changed his mind in listening to the facts.
We are with former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina. She also ran for the Senate in California in 2010. She's the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard and a likely candidate for U.S. Senate in Virginia in 2018. She'll have to win a Republican primary to be the nominee. Now, Carly, let me ask you this. So on the campaign trail, now this is an interesting question here. I just want everybody to understand this. So in the campaign trail, by the way, I was very critical of your campaign. On the campaign trail, Carly Fiorina basically campaigned for just what Trump said last night, right? Look, be a sidebar here, Carly, for a minute. You campaigned on a Middle Eastern Afghan policy, which mirrors exactly what the president said last night. Exactly. Word for word. Just like you said.
Right. And
India,
in fact,
Pakistan.
I began my response by saying that.
That's right.
So I absolutely agree with the policy.
You campaigned on it. The president mocked you and campaigned on getting out of Afghanistan and getting out of these wars. Now he's the president, and he's adopted Carly Fiorina's policy 100%. Now, what does that say to our listeners? If you like Trump and you think he's doing the right thing, what does that say about Carly Fiorina's international judgment? I would say pretty good. Am I right?
Well, thank you, John, for the compliment. Look, there were a lot of others besides myself, not necessarily on the campaign trail, but
you were the only one. Look, I followed every one of these candidates.
But here's the bigger point, I think. Here's the bigger point. We, as citizens, have to hold everyone accountable for what they say on the campaign trail. It is too easy for politicians of all kinds, and with all due respect, sometimes Trump acts like a politician. It is too easy. And we've talked about this before. We talked about it last time I was on your show. It's too easy for politicians to say whatever they think their people want to hear to get elected, and then to change their mind and do something entirely different once they're in office. Think health care, think anything you want. Politicians tend to whip, tell them what they want to hear, foment discontent, resentment, blame. All of those things, telling people what they want to hear, whip people up, stoke people's resentments and fears and grievances, all of those things help get people elected. But unfortunately, they do nothing to solve a problem. And so as citizens, I think, we have to get a little bit more exacting, get a little bit more demanding. That, you know what, don't just tell us what we want to hear. Don't just give us the simple sound bite. Tell us the truth. Tell us the complexity of situations. And tell us how you're going to actually solve a problem. Because that's what leaders do. They solve problems.
So, Carly, we have been disappointed with so many politicians who do the opposite of what you just said. They tell us what we want to hear. They get up to Washington. I don't know if they get corrupted by the power or the influence of lobbyists, but then they do something else, just like you outlined. Let me just ask you something. If you get elected to the U.S. Senate and you're a senator from Virginia, why are you going to be different?
Well, first of all, I haven't decided to run for the U.S. Senate, as I keep telling you, John. And so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But what I would say is this. Set me aside as running for office. Just set that aside. Just as a citizen of the Commonwealth of Virginia and hopefully a leader of some influence. If people look at what I've said over years, what they will find is consistency. Consistency on what my beliefs are. You know, you don't run as a pro-life conservative in California unless you mean it. I never changed my point of view from a primary to a general election. I never changed my point of view running for president. What I believe is based on long-standing experience. I'm not patting myself on the back. That's just the truth. In other words, I think it's important people, leaders of character and conviction, understand what they believe and what they think, and most importantly, they know why they believe it. They know why they think it. They can explain. They can articulate to people, here's what I've learned. Here's what I know. Here's what I've experienced. And therefore, here is what I believe. Here is what I think. And most importantly of all, here is what I will do. And we need to ask people to go through that conversation with us, not the 30-second feel-good soundbite or the applause line in the rally. But why do you think what you think? Why do you believe what you believe? And why, therefore, are you going to do what you say you're going to do?
Very well said. Let's get to monuments and statues in Virginia and this debate stemming from the Charlottesville tragedy. Should the statues come down?
Well, let me start. John, you and I talked about this before, and I said I think it's a mistake when we erase history. Unfortunately, all that changed with Charlottesville. Moral authority requires moral clarity, and moral clarity demands that when neo-Nazis carrying torches, shouting "blood is soil," alongside Ku Klux Klan members who don't even have the decency to cover their faces. When people like that march through Charlottesville, there is only one conceivable response: absolute, unequivocal condemnation. Why? Because Nazism and the KKK represent a uniquely evil place in U.S. history. And so condemnation is required and was required.
Okay. We totally agree there. And I've criticized the president for the ambiguity of some of his statements. I said they were a day late, a dollar short, and woefully inadequate. And I don't think he provided the leadership he's capable of at that moment. Now let's get to the statues and monuments in Virginia. Should they be removed? The Confederate statues and monuments, should they be removed or not?
Sadly, I think that the time for that discussion is past in many cities. Why? Because Nazis and KKK members have attached themselves to that cause. And so now you have cities who are concerned about violence. I think it's a terrible thing when we destroy history. I am perfectly willing to say that there are shameful parts of our history, and so I support city officials who say, well, let's move them, let's educate people about them. I understand that they are painful to many people, but I think now we are, unfortunately, in a new phase of this debate, and we can blame Nazis and KKK members for taking away the opportunity to have a reasonable debate. It's not like there weren't other people who were engaged in bad things as well. But again, moral authority requires moral clarity, and Nazis and KKK members must be condemned. And now that they have attached themselves to this cause, we have lost an opportunity for a while to have a reasonable discourse about this. That's just the sad reality.
So yesterday in Baltimore, Maryland, 20 hooded protesters in the middle of the night, this was Monday night, destroyed the statue in Baltimore City of Christopher Columbus, saying that he represented white supremacy. It was a 200-year-old statue, a work of art. They came, they destroyed it, they chopped it to pieces, it's gone. So if you take your position, which is it's a time for these Confederate statues to go, whether it be Johnny Reb in the city of Norfolk, Virginia, or Robert E. Lee, or I'm a VMI guy, I'm a VMI football fan. You go to VMI, you do the football games, you walk by the statue of Stonewall Jackson. I guess you take that down. Where does it end? Christopher Columbus,
I think it's a very
Jefferson
good
Davis.
Question. I think it's a very good question. And by the way, everyone who's vandalizing statues, and the Baltimore story is appalling, everyone who's vandalizing statues ought to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I hope we expend real resources to find these people. And you are absolutely right that now you have people who have taken advantage of this situation. Thank you, neo-Nazis and KKK members, for putting us here. But you have people like Al Sharpton saying, oh, taxpayers shouldn't be paying for the Jefferson Memorial because he was a slave owner. We have to find a way. John, all your questions are right. We have to find a way to get back to a civil conversation about this. And in order, in my opinion, in order to return to a place where we can have a civil, rational conversation about this, because clearly what's going on now is absurd, we have to be clear in our condemnation of these groups, because it is giving people the excuse to behave in this abhorrent fashion. Neo-Nazis and KKK members cannot be the excuse, and right now they are, because unfortunately, neo-Nazis and KKK members feel empowered. They feel emboldened. They are telling us they feel empowered and emboldened. They are, whether they're right or not, they're thanking the president for empowering them. This cannot stand.
So, isn't this, though, Orwellian, Carly? I mean, do you change history books? Do you change jackets of novels? Do you change dates? Do you do what the Soviets did and basically rewrite history to meet a narrative? I mean, where do you go with this? That's what I'm struggling with here. Where do you go with this?
And by the way, I agree with you. And yes, it is Orwellian. And no, we can't go there. And there are even people speaking up now from the former Soviet Union saying we thought things would change when we took statues down. Nothing changed. The fundamental underlying issues and resentments will not change by taking anything down. It won't solve a single problem. So now let me go all the way back to something I said before. President Trump has chosen opportunities to stoke resentment and grievance and frustration and to play the blame game. He does it in his rallies. He did it in his campaign. Now is the time, as President of the United States, to stop doing that, and instead to talk to people about how problems are going to get solved. Lots of people have stoked these resentments on both sides. Two wrongs do not make a right. You learned that in Sunday school. All your listeners did as well. Yeah, there's a lot of wrong. But at some point, someone has to step up and do the right thing. And the right thing is to condemn Nazism and the KKK unequivocally. And the right thing is to stop stoking resentment, grievance, anger, frustration, playing the blame game, and step up and start talking about how to solve the problem. Because if we don't see leadership like that from all of us, not just the president, but from all of us, then you're right. We're going to continue in this spiral, and it's a spiral downward that leads us nowhere good.
And so, Carly Fiorina, to make this clear, so you're taking the position that the president's rhetoric over the last week, or his comments, the things that he said, are stoking the fire of racism and hate. Is that what I've heard?
What I believe is that the president's comments over the last week have not calmed the situation down. They have helped. He's not the only one, but he is the president after all. They have helped inflame it. I also believe that he and many others have stoked resentment and grievance for a long time. It is the stuff of politics, John. Let's get real. The stuff of politics is to stoke resentment, fear, frustration, anger. The stuff of politics is to play the blame game and to tell us what we want to hear. No, you're not wrong. The other guy is wrong. But that stuff of politics, which gets people elected, never solves the problem. And now we have real problems. We have real tensions in society that are getting worse and not better.
So I've got to go. I've only got a minute, but give me just one example where you really believe the president played in or stoked that level of resentment with his voters.
Well, let me just say, John, Obama did the same thing. I mean, Obama stoked people's resentments and fears and grievances all the time. And it is why the situation got worse under Obama, not better. Mm-hmm. So I'm not singling Trump out, but you cannot have moral authority without moral clarity. And at a critical point, he lacked moral clarity. And that critical point was when we had torch-carrying neo-Nazis and KKK members. I mean, anyone who has watched video of those marches has to feel their blood curdle. People chanting, "Blood is soil," something Nazis used to chant throughout the Sudetenland and other places in Europe. Blood is soil. Jews will not replace us. That moment, those scenes required absolute moral clarity.
On that, we're in total agreement. No question about it. These people need to be condemned. And as I've said, and you've said, I've said it several times on CNN, these were not protesters of normal people that wanted their history preserved. These were crazy people and kooks. And I'll tell you the other thing, they came out to protest with riot gear. Who the hell does that? The whole thing.
That tells you a lot. It tells you that people are ready for a fight. That's right. And unfortunately, I would feel better if I thought they were crazy people. I don't think they're crazy. I don't think they're crazy. If you read interviews with these people, they have grievances and resentments that they think are very legitimate. And they think this is a legitimate way to express and to solve their grievances.
Well, the thing is, Carly, though, they represent a minuscule percentage of Americans. I mean, it is just...
But it is growing, John. It is growing. Those are the facts. Yes, it's small. So are the people who destroy Christopher Columbus statues. But if you don't stop something when it's small, then it gets bigger.
I agree with that. We're out of time. I want to thank Carly Fiorina for being with us. You can learn more about Carly. It's real easy. You can go to carlyfiorina.com. That's carlyfiorina.com. Carly, as always, I appreciate your candor and forthrightness. We always have such great dialogues when you're on our show. Thank you so much.